I'm coming at you with a stack of books because we are back with another reading vlog. I know, very exciting. As you know, it is May, which also means it is AAPI month, or Asian American and Pacific Islander month. And so for this week's video, I decided that we are going to be reading Asian fantasy books for a week. I've done one of these videos before, and I don't know, it's just a lot of the books that were on my current TBR happen to be Asian fantasy books. So I thought, why not? It's May, it's Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. And so I thought we could just spend the week reading all of these cool different fantasy books that I've just collected over the past few months. If you've watched videos on my channel before, you would know that I do a lot of these themed videos. I do reading K-pop romances, reading Asian American romances. I'm not just reading these books just because it is May and it is AAPI month. One of the goals I had for this channel this year was to just celebrate more Asian authors and to read more books by Asian authors. And so now is as good of a time as any. Maybe you might get some reading recommendations from this video, or if you want to join me in reading, go ahead. I have a really good stack of books. Without further ado, let's get on with this video. I'm going to introduce you to all of the books that I have on my current TBR. A lot of these are fantasy, so we're going to keep it in that fantasy genre. But the first book I'm going to introduce you to is Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee, and this is part of the Greenbone saga. The first book is Jade City, the second one is Jade War, and so this is the final installment in the trilogy. And I would describe this as, I would say, an urban fantasy. Pretty much it's about these different clans that are on this island called Kekon. And one of the main resources that these clans are sort of fighting for when it comes to control is jade, because in this world they get power from jade stone. These different clans are sort of fighting for control over it and how they want to distribute it. So this final book kind of takes you through the of different events that this one clan is facing, called the Call family. And pretty much their clan, is one of like the oldest families and most powerful families, and let's just say they've been through a lot within this 3 series installment. So I've actually started reading this, and I'm about, I would say, like 20% of the way in. It is a very thick book. I don't know how much I'm gonna vlog because for this one, just because it's the final series, it's the final book in the series, and if I end up finishing it within the week, I will be giving my review of this. So yeah, that's just a little information about the Jade Legacy. It's written by Fonda Lee, and she has become one of my favorite authors. I'm just gonna give you a quick rundown of all the other books I have. Again, I don't know if I'm going to get through all of these books in this video, but hopefully I do. The first one I have is Breath of the Dragon, and this is written by both Shanna Lee and Fonda Lee. So Fonda Lee was the author of the Greenbone saga, so the book I just introduced you to, and Shannon Lee is actually the daughter of Bruce Lee. And so this one is a YA fantasy novel that is very much inspired by like the teachings of Bruce Lee when it comes to martial arts and all of that. And there's also this fantasy element to it. I did read the first chapter and I was immediately hooked into sort of the premise of this book series. And so I really hope that this is probably going to be one of my next reads. I don't know too much of the plot because I like to sort of not know what the plot is going into these books, but this is one of the books I have on my TBR. The next book I have is Water Moon, and that this one is by Samantha Soto Yambayo. I sorry if I'm butchering the author's name. It's about like this pawn shop on the streets of Tokyo, and pretty much this pawn shop isn't like any other pawn shop where you're going to get a specific like trinket or something. Like, it's a shop that only people find when they need it. The cover is stunning, and so from what I've heard about this book is that it's in a way kind of trippy and kind of like Studio Ghibli inspired. And so I'm really interested in just to see like where this book goes and all that. So that's another one on my TBR. And then I have The Last Dragon of the East by Katrina Kwan. And this is actually a book that one of my family friends gave to me because they ended up getting an arc of it. This book has been released, though. It was released October 8th, 2024. So pretty recent or so. This is about this boy named Sai who has like this ability to sort of see like the threads of fate. So, it's like there's this, myth or legend that everyone has like a red string tied to them that leads them to their soulmate. And so this person, or this character named Sai, he has the ability to actually see those threads and be like sort of a matchmaker and find other people's soulmates for each other. But the thing is, he can also see his thread of fate, and his is gray. So it is assumed that he doesn't have a soulmate and all of that. So that is what this book is about. And so it is a really interesting premise. And so I'm really interested to see sort of what this book is about and the journey we go on with that one. And then finally, the last fantasy book I have is Gate to Kagoshima. And this is by Poppy Kuroki. But pretty much it's about this girl who learns that she descends from like samurai in Japan, somehow travels back in time to the samurai or the Satsuma rebellion and all of that. And so that's very interesting. And I don't know, I saw it in the bookstore and I was just like immediately infatuated by the cover and all of that and the sprayed edges. And so those are the main books I have on my TBR. And obviously my TBR is growing, and I obviously want to dive into more books that are inspired by all of the other Asian countries we have. These are very much inspired by Chinese mythology and Japanese mythology, but we will be continuing, to grow our TBR and our book series and read more books by more Asian authors. It's just these are the ones I've collected so far. I did want to give an honorable mention to a book I literally just picked up yesterday, and that is Julie Chan is Dead by Lian Zhang. But it is like this satire mystery novel. It's sort of similar to like the vibes of like Yellowface and all of that, where it's pretty much about this girl who has a twin and they were like separated after their parents died and all of that. And her twin was pretty much adopted by this rich white family. And so her twin ends up going to become a really popular like influencer, and then one day she learns that her twin dies, and so she takes over her twin's place and she becomes her twin the influencer. This is more of like a mystery satire novel that kind of explain that sort of comments on, influencer culture and those that style of living, pop culture and social media and all of that. I just wanted to kind of mention that this is also on my current reads. That is just a quick introduction to each of the books I'm reading, and then as I get into each book in this reading vlog, we're going to go a bit more in depth. I'm going to get started on reading Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. And normally I listen to like the audiobook for this series just because it's very political and there's a lot of information given to you no matter what happens in the series. There's a lot of politics. For the first like I don't know how many 20% I have been listening to the audiobook, but I'm just going to try to knock out as much as I can just by reading it. Now that I've kind of set myself into the book and all of that and gotten used to the writing. And then the other book I think I'm going to get started on is Gate to Kagoshima. And this one, it's one of the shorter books I have on my TBR. And so I thought today I could probably crank this out if depending on my reading speed. So let's get started on reading. Hi, coming at you guys from a bit of an awkward angle, but whatever, we're gonna move past that. I'm like right in front of my window and there is a glare in my glasses, but I have made it to almost 30% of this book, and it feels like I've barely made a dent in it, but at the same time have read so much stuff and just wanted to give you a quick update on to what I thought of Jade Legacy. And I probably won't give another update till I'm probably at least like 60% of the way into this book, but for the most part I would say like this one feels the same but different than the previous two books. I feel like the previous two books, that was a bit more linear in that a lot of the events were happening in almost real time, or if there was a time jump, it would maybe only be a couple months ahead, maybe a year if we get that. But this one, it's progressing a lot quicker. This might be a minor spoiler. There are a lot of time jumps in this book, and it's very much yearly based. So a year, like things will happen over a bunch of years, and we kind of just jump forward to those moments and sort of see how the clan is dealing with things. This one feels it's just as political as the previous two, but at the same time, rather than it being super in real time, it sort of just kind of glosses over the big events that happen, or a big event will happen and then you don't really get to see the aftermath of these events. This event will happen and then time jump to like 2 years later, and then you completely forget about, sort of that big event because you're focused on kind of like where did they progress 2 years from now, and then something else will happen and then another time jump. And so personally, I thought I would be more annoyed with that because I'm not a huge time jump person myself, but for this book, it's working for me so far. When it comes to the characters and all that, I think that's what makes this book very engaging for me, is that the characters, a lot of the characters in this book are unlikable, but it works so well when you get to see the character development and progression they have since the first book, because a lot of these characters have gone through their own journeys and have experienced a ton of trauma and all of that, but at the same time it works, and seeing that character development and seeing sort of where they are now in their lives, it's sort of like you become attached to these characters, that if anything happens to them, you feel something. You feel some type of emotion. You get some visceral reaction coming out of you when you read about them. To me, that's like really one of the main reasons why I love the series so much, is that you just genuinely come to care about these characters, even though a lot of them are very morally gray, very unlikable, and but you're sort of now seeing a newer generation, I guess, of these characters, and, sort of the politics that they have to deal with now in the future compared to, what happened in the first and second book and all of that. I'm almost at 30%. And so you probably won't get another update from me for this book until I'm at 60%, whenever that may be. But now I think I'm going to move on to the next book I'm planning on reading for this video. I've made it to about almost 50% of the way through Gate to Kagoshima. And so I thought I would give you a little update as to what I'm thinking about this book. Okay, I lied in my intro saying that this is a fantasy book. I mean, I would categorize it as like there is some fantastical elements to it, mostly the time traveling. This book is about this girl who gets transported like 128 years back in time to the Satsuma Rebellion, which is like 1877. It's not really explained like how she, what powers may be that like transported her back in time. I would classify this as actually more of like a historical fiction romance book. And for the most part, now knowing that this is the specific category that it's in, I don't actually mind it. I thought there would be a bit more action to it, but now it's really starting to pick up. The first half, I would say, it's really more of just like not a lot of like necessarily info dumping, but if you're not if you're not that familiar with like Japanese culture or Japanese history or anything like that, I think it would take you a while to sort of wrap your head around it. I'm still wrapping my head around sort of the events that happen because it is historical fiction. So there are characters in this book that existed in real life. Like half of these characters, I would say, are fictional. There's characters like Takamori Saigo, who was a real life samurai in 1877 Japan, you know. And so yeah, getting that out of the way now of this has a fantastical element, but I wouldn't classify this as like fantasy in the sense of like what, you know, the Greenbone saga is classified as fantasy. But either way, I'm still including it in this video because I'm getting hooked. I personally am enjoying it more than I thought I would. Again, it was a bit slower moving in the beginning, but now it's like it's picking up. That's kind of my first update as to this book, and then I will probably give you an update when I finish. I just finished Gate to Kagoshima by Poppy Kuroki. I sat on it for a few minutes on my thoughts of what I thought of this book. For my reviews, I usually break it down into three categories. So the first category is going to be characters, the second category is going to be plot, and then the third category is going to be other elements such as like fantastical elements, romance, etc. So let's get right into it. For the first category, let's get into it, which is characters. So the main character of this book is Isla, and she is pretty much a quarter Japanese, and she's pretty much just trying to learn more about her family and where she descends from and all of that. And you can tell right off the bat that this character is based off of the author, just like literally reading the author's notes and all of that. I would say for characterization for this book, I would give it around a 3. I would say 3.25 out of 5 for characters. I think the characters, you know, you had a very base level understanding of them and all of that, but there were definitely moments in this book where they could have been expanded upon more. And I feel like also because she took so much reference from her own life into and put it into the main character, you know, I feel like it I don't know, it might have been harder for her to do that because I feel like Isla's just kind of like there the entire book. She, you know, obviously she's thrust into this like, you know, different time period and all of that, but at the same time, it's sort of like I feel like there could have been more characterization for her cuz really when you read about it, you don't learn a lot about Isla. The main guy in this book, he has a very, you know, interesting characterization. Again, it's very base level understanding and all of that, but at the same time, you know, you see his loyalty of being someone who is loyalty to the samurai. You see his loyalty to his family. Because this book is so short, they don't get as much time to be expanded upon and all that. And really, a lot of the times, it kind of felt like the characters were just there for plot convenience and to kind of further along the story and all that. But at the same time, this is historical fiction. Half of the characters in this book are based off of either real life people or she incorporated real life, you know, samurai and all of that existed in history. But overall, 3.25 out of 5 for characters. Now let's move on to plot. For plot, I would give this a 3.5 out of 5 for plot. I personally, the plot surprised me in this book because I'm not a huge time travel fan, just because of like the mechanics that happen and sort of, you know, just like the butterfly effect of if you change one thing, you're going to change all of history. And then it's also kind of like, how are the characters going to get back to the present? Like, that's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of just different things in time travel books and all that that you have to take account for and all of that. And so, yeah, for this one, she pretty much gets transported into 1877 to the Satsuma Rebellion. It is a retelling of a real life event that happened and where the Imperial Army, you know, is tasked with, you know, getting rid of all of the samurai. The main plot is really about the war violence that goes on. The actual war and all that doesn't kick in till like later in this book. So going into it, definitely be cautious that this is a pretty gory book. It's very a raw depiction of how war is, you know, and it is a bit gorier. And if you're not, or if you haven't read that many books that have war violence or gore or anything like that, then you might be kind of taken aback. It's sort of an unfolding and retelling of the events that happened, you know, back in 1877 Japan. But also at the same time, there is a romance subplot to this, and that subplot I didn't care as much for. I just kind of found it a bit out of place, especially in a book that was very, heavy on the war violence. So when the romance does kick in, I'm kind of just like, is this the right place? So I wasn't a huge fan of the romance and all of that, and I feel like the payoff of it, even at the end, I didn't care for as much, but that is just my personal opinion. And then finally, let's go to fantastical elements or other elements. I don't think this was ever marketed as a fantasy book, but for me, for some reason, I just thought it was fantasy. Maybe it's just like the cover or something, or me. I don't know. I don't know why I categorize this as fantasy, but it's not that fantasy related or anything. Like, there's no like magical creatures or magical elements to it. Sorry if this title to this video is misleading. I don't know why I thought this was a fantasy book, but that's on me. The only fantastical element is that like she just ends up in the Satsuma Rebellion. We don't know really the mechanics of how she gets there, but she gets there somehow. And so, yeah, that is the first book down in this video, which was not a fantasy book at all. And, like, tell me why I always do this. I did this in my other reading Asian fantasy books for a week video as well. This is just me not knowing how to categorize the books I get because I don't read the synopsis in the back. We're on this journey together, and that is what we're doing. So yeah, that is my review of Gate to Kagoshima. Overall 3.75 out of 5 for rating. I don't know what the next book is going to be, but I will guarantee you guys, I guarantee it will be a fantasy book. It will be a fantasy book. This book was just the outlier for this video. The next book I decided to get started on is The Last Dragon of the East by Katrina Kwan. So when I introduced this book, I did introduce that element of like the strings of fate and all of that, but obviously from the title, there are dragons involved in this book that I just failed to mention. I got started on this book last night and I'm only about like 40 pages in, so still very early in the beginning. The first part is about like the strings of fate, but the second part is about the main character getting sent to go on this quest to find the last dragon. Sai gets his hands on these dragon scales and he gets in a lot of trouble for it, and so now he's sent on a quest to find the last dragon. So that is the other half of the plot that I failed to mention because I'm doing so well in this video right now. I've gotten through 33% of the way through this book, and I'm kind of conflicted. I don't know if it's because I have an arc of this book, if there were any like changes that were made after publishing and all of that, but I don't know. It's like the first third of this book, so much stuff has happened, and in a way it kind of feels a bit jarring. Like the events that happen really quickly, and you're introduced to characters really quickly, and it kind of confuses me as to sort of what this book is really about, like what the main plot point of this book is about. Like, is it about strings of fate? Is it about hunting dragons? Like, is it more romance focused than fantasy focused? I am a bit confused as to sort of the main premise of this book. It's going in a direction that I didn't expect it to go to. Those are kind of my main few thoughts on it. I'll probably update you again as I get into like further on in the book and all that, but those are my main thoughts that I have right now. It is Tuesday, and I don't think I gave an update yesterday as to what I've been reading, but yesterday I made it 50% of the way through Jade Legacy. This book I've been eating up. It's just, I've been absorbed in it. I've been absorbed into the world and all of that, and so I am probably going to finish this by the end of this week. And then update for The Last Dragon of the East. I am hoping to get through a chunk of this later tonight, so hopefully within the next few days I get my review and all of that. But also, you guys, I've been waiting for these for months, but pretty much My Throne of Glass book Dust Jacket covers finally arrived. I ordered these like in November, I think, for like Black Friday, and they had like, I don't know, they had a tough time getting all of these from like their suppliers and all that, and shipments kept coming in late and all that, so I finally got them. And yeah, I will insert a clip of how they look when I remember to. So, yeah. Hey friends, I am back and I'm here to give you my review of The Last Dragon from the East. I didn't get as much vlog footage of me reading this book, but let's just hop right into the review right away. And sorry if I look kind of like weird. My makeup is literally like melting off my face right now. Overall, I gave this book a 3 stars. I would give characters 3 out of 5 stars. And honestly, for this book, I just feel like the characters weren't developed enough. Like, obviously, they're the two main characters and all that, but I don't know. I just feel like we learned a lot about them, but we didn't really get to like learn about them, if that makes sense. Like, you got a very surface level understanding of who they were and sort of their values and, like, you know, what they stand for, but at the same time, it just felt too surface level. And there were also a bunch of, like, characters that appear within, like, the book and all that, and they were mostly there for plot convenience as well. So it's like when you were introduced to a new character in the book, you immediately sort of knew like something was going to happen to them. I just feel like they were very surface level. And so that's why for this review, I really can't say a lot about characters just because I don't really know a lot about them. And also at the same time, like, I don't really know like how much I can say without this being being a spoiler. Characters 3 out of 5. Now let's move on to plot. So for plot, I would also give this a 3. Okay, I'll give it a 3.25 out of 5 just to be a bit nicer. Because this book was definitely more plot based, but at the same time, when it came to this book and all of that, I would say the first 5% of the book got me hooked. And then it started to slow, and then it was pretty much the same speed until the last 10% of this book. Honestly, I just am very confused about sort of who this book is really for. This book doesn't know its target audience. And so it was sort of like the way characters spoke versus the way characters acted felt very off. There were moments where I just didn't know what age this book was targeted for. Like, they spoke like, like a younger age. Like, it felt like it was targeted at a younger age. And then there were some moments where it was very much like older, and like it's like more on the older end of young adult and all that. So I was kind of like, who is this really for? And then when it came to plot, it's just the problem I had with this plot is a lot of stuff happens. And I feel like this book also didn't really know what direction it wanted to go in until the end. And so when you're beginning the book, you think it's going to be more of like a fantasy book, and then you veer into romance, and then you go back into fantasy, and then you veer back into romance, and there's just not, the pacing of it was kind of weird, because you were kind of pulled in these different directions every single chapter, and then every time the characters would get into a situation, you would know that the situation would resolve itself in the next 2 chapters. And so I felt like there wasn't enough tension, and there wasn't enough, like, the stakes weren't high until probably the end of the book, to be quite honest. Like, the end of the book is where like the stakes are actually become high, and like, stuff is happening, and there's that suspense, there's that tension. But for like the middle beginning middle section of this book, it is very predictable. It is a very predictable direction as to where they're going. And so I feel like there just wasn't enough of a build for me to really like immerse myself and like, keep me reading and all that, because I just sort of knew what was going to happen in the next chapter. And so yeah, so for plot for me, I would give this a 3.25 out of 5. I like the ending and I like the beginning. It's just the middle section did not care about. And then for fantasy elements, I would give it actually like a 3.5 out of 5 for like fantasy elements. There was enough. There was magic involved, there was mythology involved, there were, there's dragons involved and all that. There's mythical creatures involved. And so I really like those elements of it, but I feel like we could have done more with it in this book. We're competing against each other to be the main star rather than working together. For fantasy elements, it's like I love fated soulmates. I love that trope. I like that there's dragons. I like that there's magic. I like, that there were a lot of references to Asian, Chinese mythology. But it's just there were just a lot of things that I felt like could have been done better in this book. And so yeah, for fantasy elements, 3.5 out of 5. I gave this book a 3 stars, and like it's not a bad book at all. It's just for me, I just don't know what the audience for this book is supposed to be. And also, the copy I'm reading is an advanced reader copy. I don't know how many changes she made from this one compared to the actual book. I don't know how much of this book is edited. This is Katrina Kwan's first, like, it's her debut novel. And so, like, for a debut novel, like, I would say, like, it was a good novel. I think could have been polished up a bit more. But overall, like, if you're looking for a fantasy with a lot of romance. I wouldn't necessarily can't categorize it as romantasy. I feel like that is like a genre in itself. But if you're looking for a fantasy that has a lot of romance to it, I would say like you would probably like this. So those are my thoughts on The Last Dragon of the East by Katrina Kwan. Sorry I didn't get a lot of vlog footage for this one, but without further ado, let's move on to my next book tomorrow. It is now Saturday, and I thought I would give you a quick reading update as to what I've read within the past few days or so from whenever I last updated you. This morning, I ended up finishing Jade Legacy by Fonda Lee. I've been reading this periodically throughout the week, and I just didn't vlog myself reading because there are tons of spoilers since this is the last book in the series, and so I didn't want to spoil this series for anyone who's interested in reading it. But let me tell you, I cried at the end of this. Like, not like physically, but like internally, I was sobbing. There were so many like visceral reactions that came out of me while reading this book that it's just I have to dissect my thoughts with you guys, because I am literally still thinking about this. I had to take a couple hours to just sit on my thoughts and think about how I really felt about this book and all that. But overall, this I would say is one of my favorite series. I literally like I need to discuss and talk about it with you guys. So we're gonna break it down by characters, plot, and fantasy elements. So for characters, I'm giving it a 5 out of 5. Since this is the third book in the installment, you are pretty much following the same journey as the characters that are introduced to you in like the first book, and overall you get to see the end of their character arcs and sort of where they end up, in the future and all that, or where they end up over a really long period of time. So I would say like the first and second book are more of a snapshot of a certain period of time within these characters, and then I would say Jade Legacy is more so like expands upon years and years and years of these characters and sort of what they have gone through. And so I would say out of all the books, this is a more character driven novel. And so you're really there to kind of sit with the characters and really dissect what they know and how they see their world and sort of how they approach situations, which I really love. And the thing about Fonda Lee is nobody hates the Call family more than Fonda Lee, okay? They cannot catch a break no matter where they go, what they do. Like, Fonda Lee has such a way of pulling at your heartstrings because she writes all these different types of characters, and a lot of them are unlikable. A lot of them, I feel like when reading this, you're going to most likely disagree with how they do things and how they approach problems. But the thing is, it's like as much as you want to dislike them, it is so hard to like it's so hard to when they're approached with all of these situations and all of these like these horrible things will happen to either them or someone, um that they care for, and you have no choice but to, sympathize for them and empathize for them. And so it's she has such a Fonda Lee has such a way of like writing characters that even if they're unlikable, you end up liking them by the end of the book. For characters, 5 out of 5 stars. There were so many of them that I loved, and it's like I can't really talk about any of like the development they had without giving spoilers. And so, but yeah, just know that nobody hates the Call family more than Fonda Lee. Now let's move on to plot. So plot, I would give a 5 out of 5 as well. And And the thing with this book is I mentioned it before, but it's more of a character driven novel than a plot driven novel. This book takes place over a long period of time. I think it's a period of over like 10 to like 20 years. And so you get to see these characters in different points of their life in this book. And it's really interesting because Fonda Lee does it in a way where she tells part of a story and then she'll jump a few years and she tells another part of the story. And, she sort of feeds you pieces of information that, in a way, sometimes feel a bit choppy. And you're kind of just like, why do I need to know this information? And then by the time you get to the end of the book, you're like, okay, like this is starting to make sense now as to why we were being told from this point of view and this point of view. And this book is also told from multiple like points of views of different characters. And so, sometimes you're introduced to a new character and you don't really know how to think of them and sort of like, why am I learning about this character and what they're doing? And then, you learn later, okay, like they did contribute to the plot. And so, yeah, like there is a plot, but I don't think it's as plot driven as the first and second book. This one is really more so of her like telling a story that happens over 10, to 20 years of these characters' lives. But still, for me, 5 out of 5 when it comes to plot. I really liked how everything, was told and how it wrapped up and all of that. I think it was a very bittersweet ending. And so, and that's what I love about a fantasy book. I love a fantasy book that really has high stakes and really does tug at your heart, even though, the things that happen, you don't want it to happen. It leaves this emotional impact on you that I think, it's really hard to come by, especially nowadays for books. It left a really big emotional impact on me reading this book. So yeah, 5 out of 5 for plot. And then finally for fantasy elements, I have to say I have to give it to this book 5 out of 5. The magic system in this book is very unique in that, Jade gives powers to, these people. And so really they're trying to kind of navigate that power system in Jade Legacy. Again, this is an urban fantasy, so it takes place in a world similar to ours. I think if you're looking for more of a high fantasy or whatever, like if you're looking for people who are carrying swords and, there's major war violence going on and there's major battles happening, I don't think you're going to find it in this book specifically. This one is more of a gangster kind of clan type of book. And so obviously there's action and there's fighting and things are happening and all of that, and there is violence. It's not in the typical type of like fantasy book you would think of, if that makes sense. The magic system and all that is very much inspired by like Asian mythology and all of that. And so yeah, but reading this book, I really did have to sit back and, think about it and really think on my thoughts about this book. But overall, yeah, fantasy elements 5 out of 5 stars. So overall this book is a 5 stars in my book, in my opinion. I liked it probably this one the most out of all three books. I think the first book is very much world building. The second book is a bit more angsty and all of that, and this one is very bittersweet. And so yeah, to read this book for the first time again, this just ended up being one of my favorite series now. And those are my thoughts on the Greenwood Saga, and the last book, Jade Legacy, in that trilogy. So the next book I am going to pick up is Breath of the Dragon by Shannon and Fonda Lee. And I took the dust jacket off, and like, look at that. Look at Bruce Lee on the cover. This is written by both Shannon Lee and Fonda Lee. Fonda Lee, who literally I just talked about, and Shannon Lee, Bruce Lee's daughter. This is a young adult fantasy novel. I ended up getting the audiobook from Libby, so I'm going to do sort of an immersive reading experience with that and this book. But I know if I don't pick up another book soon, I am going to fall into a reading slump. And so it just so happens that, I just have another Fonda Lee book. So, similar writing. I love Fonda Lee's writing. And so I think this is going to be a bit of an easier kind of transition in reading another book that will probably break my heart. But, that's okay. Sometimes to enjoy things, you need to go through a bit of pain. And yeah, let's get started on this book. Hi, so I've changed to my pajamas and I thought I would give a little update as to where I am in Breath of the Dragon. I've made it to about 30% of the way through this book, and for the most part, I'm enjoying it. It's just a lot different. It's a lot more different than I thought it was going to be going into it. Again, this is written by both Fonda Lee and Shannon Lee, and so I thought it was going to be a bit more like the vibes or the writing style of Jade of the Greenbone Saga. I definitely see Fonda Lee's writing style coming through and all that. It's just a lot more different than what I experienced reading the Greenbone Saga. I would say the Greenbone Saga is very dark. It is very gritty and all of that, and the world building is very rich and detailed. Meanwhile, in this book, there is somewhat of a magic system, but the writing is definitely a bit lighter. Like the writing is definitely lighter and definitely suited to more of a YA audience, more so on like the older side of YA, I would say. But this one, you can definitely see the Bruce Lee inspired elements to it. It's just going in a direction that I didn't necessarily expect it to go into. Um, and but for the most part, I am enjoying it in the 30% of the way through this book, and I can definitely tell that this is definitely more inspired by martial arts teachings and all of that. And I feel like if you're someone who is Asian, you at least know who Bruce Lee is, and you can definitely tell that it is just a book really trying to capture his legacy and all that. So yeah, for the most part, I am enjoying this though, and those are my updates I have for you so far. Okay, so I've made it to about a bit more than halfway in this book, and overall, it is starting to pick up. Now we've entered the territory of what I originally thought that this book was supposed to kind of like be about. This is a very martial arts driven book, and I feel like if you aren't looking for a fantasy book that, really dives into the technicalities of, being in a duel and fighting different opponents, I don't think you would enjoy this as much. But for the most part, I'm really enjoying it. Again, I think this is going to be a series, and so it is sort of following the writing style of Fonda Lee. It is a bit more slow paced than I would like, especially for a YA novel. But at the same time, I know that there's probably, if this is a series, there's going to be a lot more depth happening in the later books. But yeah, about a bit more than 50% of the way through this book, and those are my thoughts for now, and I will probably return when I get to the end of this book. Hey besties, I am back with my last update for Breath of the Dragon. I finished this last night and I really needed to sit on my thoughts about this book for a bit. And overall, let's just get straight into it. The first category we have is characters. And so for characters, I would give this a good 4 out of 5 for characters. There are a lot of characters in this book, and in this book, you follow the main protagonist, which is Jun, and he is pretty much this young boy who has the goal of becoming the guardian for the emperor in this book. And as you read throughout the story, there's a reason as to why he wants to become guardian so badly. It's mostly due to him being separated from his twin brother Sai. And this isn't a spoiler or anything, like you learn this in the prologue. These two twins who get separated, and pretty much you mainly only get the perspective of Jun, and so it's really interesting to sort of see that unfold. And this is, I would say, you learn enough about the characters, and there's enough characters that you learn enough of it and you learn a lot about their motivations. But I would say this is more of a plot driven novel, and so hopefully, as I believe this is going to be a series, so as the series continues, we get to learn more about each of the characters, because I felt like a lot of characters were really just there for plot convenience and you didn't get to learn a lot about them. And so I really kind of want to unpack more about all of these characters. Next, let's move on to plot. So for plot, I gave this another 4 out of 5 for plot. The main reason is just it felt like it was a bit slower paced in plot, or it just wasn't as action adventurous as I thought it would be. I wasn't as engaged in the plot as much. Once we got about to like 80% through this book, then I started getting like into it. So it was just a slower paced book for me, and I feel like it's just due to the fact that there's a lot of world building that needed to happen, and there were a lot of a lot of references, and it pays homage to a lot of Bruce Lee's teachings. I would highly suggest, if you're going to read this and you're not familiar with Bruce Lee or anything, definitely research his type of style of martial arts and all of that, because um I think once you understand the references that they're trying to make in this book, it becomes a much like not easier read, but a more fun read, I would say, or a more entertaining read, because you can kind of tie in the elements together. But yeah, plot wise, it does move a bit slower than I expected, and also the plot kind of took me into places that I just didn't like expect it to go. I thought it would be more of like a academy type of book, where we're with other students, but it's not really like that at all. So if you're going into this thinking that it's going to be about like a school type of training environment, it's not like that at all. This is very much more like tournament based. I would like kind of it kind of references Karate Kid in that sense. Like definitely gave me Karate Kid vibes going into it sometimes, and so yeah, it focuses on the student versus the master type of teaching, and yeah, so definitely for plot, I would give it a 4 out of 5, and then the not last category we have is fantasy elements. And so for fantasy elements, I would give this a 4.5 out of 5 just for fantasy elements alone, because I really like the type of magic system they have, and sort of how Fonda Lee and Shannon Lee like weave in sort of these magical elements and these martial arts like very human elements to the book. In this book is that people have gotten powers by being dragon marked. And so pretty much dragons have a very sort of big role in this book, and there is their own type of magic system happening, but specific individuals are dragon marked, meaning that the dragons pick these people, and pretty much all of them are born with like these dragon like scales on, really any parts of their body. And so these scales and these marks are supposedly give people different magical powers and all of that. So some people, their senses become heightened. Other people can manipulate others' emotions. They all kind of get these different types of powers from the dragon, and pretty much one of the main plot elements is that these dragon marked people are forced into conscription, I would say. That's kind of how it goes. So if they're dragon marked, um, they they have to, work for the whoever is in power. I think it's the emperor or someone, and become aspects. That was the word I was looking for. Aspects. They and so yeah, like there's a lot of different elements in this book that, that work. And so for me, I feel like because there's such a strong like magic system and like fantasy elements in this book, it does take a while to world build and sort of learn the world and sort of, also tie in those like elements of like, Bruce Lee's teachings and all that. So I personally, by the end of it, I really enjoyed this book. It took me kind of a while to get into and to really connect with what was happening in the book and with the characters and all of that. But once I did and I sort of understood type of what direction the book was going in, it became a much easier read. So overall, I gave this book a 4.25 stars. I think it was a pretty strong start, but I think, as the series continues to go, it'll become much stronger. And I always see that in Fonda Lee's works as well. Like she has that magic system, ready to be built. And so I think the next book, or however many books that are going to be in this series, will be a bit more like of an easier read, if that makes sense. So yeah, I don't want to like say too much because I don't want to spoil this book, but I do have like plenty of opinions about how I feel about this book. But yeah, overall 4.25 stars. And yeah, that's my review for Breath of the Dragon. So with that being said, I think I'm going to end this video here. I know I had one more book in store, but I don't feel like reading that right now, and I really need to edit this video, so I think that's what I'm going to do. We're going to end it here, and I'm going to edit this video. I'm probably planning on reading more Asian-inspired books and all of that as, you know, the month goes on. This is where I'm going to end this video. Thank you so much for watching if you made it this far. Let me know if you've read any of these books or are planning to read any of these books. Maybe you found some recommendations for your reading this month. And yeah, thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!